A single dad CEO's car breaks down on a mountain road, a forest girl helps, and, hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. Let's go back to our main character. On a cold and rainy evening, the mountainside road stretched out, slick with wet leaves and the sheen of recent rain. The sound of the engine sputtered and groaned as David Hart, a successful CEO, sat behind the wheel of his sleek black SUV. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he tried to coax the car back to life. He was miles away from the nearest town, with no signal on his phone and no way to reach anyone for help. He muttered a frustrated curse under his breath. He had been so focused on his work lately, and now, this. His mind raced with thoughts of how much he had to get done, how much his company relied on him, how many people were depending on him to be at the meeting tomorrow. He tried the engine again. Nothing. Silence. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Through the misty rain, he saw a figure approaching from the side of the road, moving with purpose. A young woman, her long hair flowing behind her as she moved swiftly through the downpour. She was wearing a simple outfit, nothing that screamed luxury or comfort, but something about her stood out. Her presence seemed to almost defy the storm, like she belonged to this place. David felt a sense of relief. At least someone was coming to help. She walked up to his car and knocked gently on the window. He rolled it down, eyes wary. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft yet strong, cutting through the noise of the rain. "It's a bit more than I can handle," David replied, forcing a smile. "My car's dead, and I've got no signal. I'm stuck out here." The young woman's brow furrowed in thought, but she didn't hesitate. "You're lucky I was heading this way," she said, taking a step back and looking at the car. She gestured toward the trees. "There's a cabin not far from here. You can wait there until the storm clears." David was about to refuse, but then he realized something. He was stranded, and she was the only person around. The least he could do was follow her and hope for the best. He nodded. "All right, lead the way." The walk was short, but with the storm raging around them, it felt longer than it was. The woman's footsteps were sure, confident, like she had walked this path 1,000 times before. David couldn't help but notice how different she was from anyone he knew. She wasn't dressed in expensive clothes, no designer brands, no accessories that screamed wealth. Instead, she wore sturdy boots, a worn jacket, and carried an air of independence that was both impressive and a little humbling. After a few minutes, they reached a small wooden cabin tucked between the trees. It was simple but charming, with a warm light glowing from the windows. The woman opened the door and gestured for David to enter. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment. The cabin smelled of pine and wood, and the warmth from the small stove hit him instantly. "I wasn't expecting company," the woman said with a small, shy smile, "but I'm glad to help." David looked around, trying to get a sense of who this woman was. She didn't fit into the world he was used to, but there was something about her that made him feel more at ease than he had in days. "I appreciate it," he said, his voice quieter now. She nodded, disappearing into a small back room before emerging with a couple of towels. "You'll want to dry off," she said, tossing him one. "I'll make you some tea." As she busied herself with the kettle, David couldn't help but wonder about her. Who was she? What was she doing so far out in the mountains, away from everything? She seemed completely at home here, and yet she didn't seem to belong to any of the worlds he knew. It wasn't just the lack of wealth or fancy possessions. It was something more, a sense of self, of peace, that David had long forgotten. He watched her for a moment, and then, without thinking, asked, "What's your name?" She paused, looking over her shoulder at him with a slight smile. "Lily," she said simply. "And you?" "David," he replied, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time in a while, he didn't feel like the CEO or the businessman. He just felt human. They sat down together at the small wooden table, sipping tea in the quiet of the cabin. The rain outside began to ease up, but the storm inside David's mind didn't subside. He was grateful for the help, but something more was stirring inside him. Something about Lily, about her life, made him question everything. He thought about how his life had been consumed by work, by deadlines, by expectations. But sitting here, in this simple cabin with a stranger who had no idea who he was, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. David sat quietly, sipping his tea, the warmth of the small cabin filling him with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The storm outside had begun to subside, and with it, the chaos in his mind seemed to settle as well. As Lily continued to move around the room, preparing another cup of tea for herself, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in him. The frantic pace of his life, the endless meetings, the constant pressure seemed so distant now, almost foreign. He felt something he hadn't realized he was missing: peace. He glanced over at Lily, who was now sitting across from him, her eyes focused on the steaming cup in her hands. Her simplicity was so different from the polished world he came from. The contrast was striking. She wasn't concerned with appearances, with status, with the things that so often defined the lives of the people in his world. Lily lived in a way that seemed untouched by the rush and noise of the outside world. Her presence was like the quiet calm after a storm, a rare gift in a world that never stopped moving. David cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to end up here," he said softly, his eyes searching her face for some kind of response. Lily looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I imagine not," she replied, her voice calm and gentle. "But you're safe now." Her words were simple, but they carried a sense of reassurance that made David feel as though everything was going to be okay, even if just for tonight. He looked around the cabin once more, noticing the small details that spoke volumes: the handmade quilts draped over the couch, the stacks of books on the shelves, the fresh flowers in a vase by the window. It was all so personal. It made him realize how much he had neglected the personal aspects of his own life. How often had he neglected the things that truly mattered, in favor of chasing more and more success? The question lingered in his mind, but he quickly pushed it aside. He had a job to do, a company to run, a legacy to build. But in this moment, as he sat in this simple cabin, something inside him was starting to change. "So, what do you do out here, Lily?" David asked, trying to steer the conversation to lighter ground. He needed to know more about her, about the life she led. He had no idea how a person could live so isolated, yet so content. Lily paused, looking at him for a moment before she answered. "I live here," she said simply. "I take care of the land, help out with the local community, and do what I can to make a difference." She seemed to choose her words carefully, as though there was more she could say, but she didn't need to. David could sense that there was a depth to her words, something unspoken. She wasn't just talking about the physical work she did. There was something more. "That sounds fulfilling," David replied, his voice keyeder now. He hadn't meant for it to sound like an empty statement, but it did. He was searching for something more in his own life. Something that would make him feel as if he were doing more than just running a company. Lily's gaze softened as she looked at him. "It is," she said, her voice low but sure. "I think fulfillment comes from being true to yourself, from living a life that feels right, even if it's not what the world expects." David absorbed her words, feeling their weight. For the first time in a long while, he felt as though he was hearing something real, something meaningful. His life had been so full of noise and distractions, but Lily's life, in contrast, was simple and grounded. He couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. He had always thought that success was the answer, that it would bring him happiness, fulfillment. But sitting here, in this small cabin, with Lily, he wondered if he had it all wrong. "You seem at peace," David said, almost to himself. "How do you do it? How do you live like this, so free?" Lily smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. "It's not about freedom from anything," she said, her voice soft but confident. "It's about freedom to be who you really are. That's what brings peace." David sat back, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had spent so much time trying to prove himself, trying to achieve things that he thought would make him happy. But had he ever stopped to ask himself what he truly wanted? The thought was unsettling. He didn't know the answer. But sitting here, with Lily, he felt as though he was beginning to find it. The cabin, with its warmth and simplicity, had a way of making everything else seem unimportant. David couldn't remember the last time he had felt so relaxed, so present in the moment. There was no rush here, no pressure. Just the quiet sound of the rain tapping against the windows, the warmth of the fire crackling softly in the corner. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to simply be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. David was beginning to realize something important, something that, perhaps, he had known all along but had been too busy to acknowledge. The truth was, he had been chasing the wrong things. But now, in this moment, it felt like he was on the cusp of finding something better. As the evening stretched on, the storm outside slowly faded into a soft drizzle, the gentle tapping of rain against the cabin's windows, creating a soothing rhythm. David found himself lost in the quiet, almost reluctant to break the peace that had settled between them. The simple act of sitting together in silence felt more profound than anything he had experienced in years. He glanced at Lily, who was now sitting across from him, her hands cradling her warm cup of tea. Her calmness was a stark contrast to the restless energy that usually consumed him. The longer he spent in her company, the more he realized how much of his life had been dominated by noise, by ambition, by the constant drive to achieve more. He hadn't even realized how much he had missed true stillness until now. After a few moments, David spoke, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Lily," he began, his words coming out slower than usual. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel different. I've spent so many years chasing something, but here, in this moment, I feel like I'm finally breathing." Lily looked at him, her expression softening. She took a slow sip of her tea, as if considering his words. "You're not the first person I've heard say that," she replied quietly. "Sometimes, all we need is to step away from everything, to really see what's been right in front of us all along." Her words echoed in David's mind, and for the first time in a long while, he truly understood their meaning. He had been so caught up in building his empire, in making deals, in achieving success, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. The simple things, the things he used to take for granted, like being present in the moment, like connecting with another person without any agenda, had faded into the background of his life. He couldn't help but feel a pang of regret for all the time he had wasted. "I've been so focused on my career," David continued, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "But I'm realizing that it's not what makes me happy. It's not what I really want." Lily set her cup down and looked at him with a gentle smile. "It's not too late," she said softly. "You can always choose a different path, one that aligns with who you are, not what the world expects you to be." David's heart ached at her words, not from sadness, but from the realization that he had been living a life that wasn't truly his own. He had been following a path that others had set for him, a path that led him to wealth and power but not to peace, not to fulfillment. He had been chasing the wrong things. "But how do I start?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Lily leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant for a moment, as if considering his question carefully. "Start by doing things that feel right to you," she said slowly. "Start by living in a way that feels true to who you really are. Don't worry about what others expect or what you think you should be doing. Just take one step at a time." David thought about her words, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. It seemed so simple, yet he had never truly considered it. He had always been driven by the need to succeed, to prove himself, to achieve more. But now, in this small cabin, surrounded by nothing but nature and the soft presence of Lily, he realized that maybe success wasn't the answer. Maybe true happiness was about living authentically, about embracing simplicity, about being present in the moment. For the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about the numbers on a balance sheet or the accolades on a wall. It was about finding peace, about connecting with people who mattered, about being true to oneself. Lily's calm presence, her grounded nature, had shown him a different way of living, one that he had never considered before. He was grateful for it. As the rain continued to fall outside, David sat back in his chair, taking in the quiet of the moment. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had all the time in the world. There were no deadlines, no meetings, no expectations. Just this simple, beautiful moment. Lily looked at him again, her eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said, her voice gentle. "Just take things one day at a time. Life has a way of unfolding when you're ready for it." David smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He didn't need to have it all figured out. He didn't need to rush. He had a lifetime ahead of him to figure out what really mattered. And maybe, just maybe, he had already found the beginning of that answer here, in this quiet cabin, with a woman who had shown him what it truly meant to live. The night continued, the rain outside gradually fading into a gentle mist, and for the first time in what felt like ages, David felt truly at peace. The warmth of the fire in the cabin kept the chill of the night at bay, and the soft glow of the lamp cast a quiet, comforting light across the room. He glanced at Lily, who was sitting across from him, her expression thoughtful, her hands resting gently around her cup of tea. He had been so caught up in his thoughts, but now, with the weight of his worries lifted, he realized how much he had needed this moment of calm. The simplicity of the life she led, the quiet strength she embodied it, was everything he had been searching for, even if he hadn't known it. "Lily," David said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. His voice was softer than usual, carrying a sense of vulnerability that he hadn't allowed himself to express in a long time. "I don't think I've ever really stopped to think about what I actually want out of life. It's always been about goals, about achievements, about what I'm supposed to be doing. But sitting here with you, I feel like I'm seeing things in a new light." Lily looked at him, her gaze steady and calm, as if she had known this moment was coming all along. "It's okay," she said quietly, her voice like a gentle breeze. "We all get caught up in the rush. It's easy to forget what really matters." David nodded, his mind racing. "But what does matter? I've spent so much of my life thinking that success and wealth would bring me happiness, but now I'm not so sure." Lily didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be considering his words carefully. After a moment, she spoke again. "Happiness doesn't come from what you have, David," she said softly. "It comes from who you are, from the connections you make, from the way you live your life. It's about finding peace within yourself, not in things or achievements." David let her words sink in, and for the first time, he allowed himself to really consider them. He had spent so many years trying to prove himself, building an empire, accumulating wealth, thinking that those things would bring him fulfillment. But sitting here, in this cabin, surrounded by nature and the simplicity of Lily's life, he realized that none of that had ever been enough. He had been searching for happiness in the wrong places. "I don't know where to start," David admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've spent so long living a certain way, I don't even know what it would look like to live differently." Lily smiled, a small, knowing smile, as if she understood exactly what he was feeling. "Start small," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You don't have to change everything at once. Just take one step at a time. Do what feels right for you. Find the things that bring you peace, and let those things guide you." David thought about her words, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to have everything figured out. He didn't have to follow a prescribed path. He could create his own path, one that aligned with who he truly was. "I think I'm starting to understand," David said, his voice quieter now, as if he were speaking to himself as much as to her. "I've been chasing the wrong things all this time. I've been focused on what the world expects of me, on what I thought would make me happy. But maybe it's time to focus on what actually makes me feel alive." Lily's smile deepened, and she nodded. "That's the first step," she said gently. "It's about finding your own truth and living it." David sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't about having more. It wasn't about achieving the next big goal or building the next big thing. It was about living authentically, about being true to himself and what he wanted from life. The realization was both freeing and terrifying. For so long he had been defined by his success, by the titles he held and the deals he closed. But now, as he sat here with Lily, he realized that those things didn't define him at all. What defined him was how he lived, how he treated others, how he chose to spend his time. The storm outside had passed, and in its place, the world felt quieter, softer. It felt like everything had slowed down, and David could finally breathe. Thank you, David said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude, for helping me see all of this. Lily looked at him, her expression warm. You don't have to thank me, she said softly. You've done all the work yourself. You just needed a little reminder to see things clearly. David smiled, feeling a deep sense of appreciation for her, and the way she had helped him see his life from a new perspective. The night had changed him, in ways he couldn't fully understand yet, but he knew one thing for certain: he was ready to start living differently. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could create a life that was true to himself, a life that was full of meaning, connection, and peace. The morning after the storm, David woke up to the soft light of the early sun filtering through the cabin's small windows. The air smelled fresh, clean, and the world outside felt completely different from the one he had left behind. It was a slow, peaceful morning, unlike anything he had experienced in years. The hustle and bustle of his everyday life seemed like a distant memory now, a part of a past that felt less and less like his own. He stretched out on the simple bed, feeling a deep sense of restfulness that he hadn't known in a long time. It was almost as if the storm from the previous night had washed away more than just the rain. It had washed away the weight of all the expectations and pressures he had carried for so long. Slowly, he got up and moved toward the small kitchen area where Lily was already busy making breakfast. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, a simple pleasure he had forgotten to appreciate in his busy life. Lily was humming softly to herself, her movements relaxed and easy. She didn't seem to have a care in the world, and in that moment David envied her ease. He had been so consumed by his work, by the need to perform, to succeed, that he had lost touch with the small joys in life. But now, standing in the warm glow of the cabin, watching Lily move about, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for this quiet, simple life she led. "Good morning," David said softly, his voice a little hoarse from sleep. Lily looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning. Sleep well?" she asked as she poured him a cup of coffee. "Better than I have in ages," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an honesty he hadn't expected. It felt good to admit that. For so long, he had been running, always chasing something. But now, in this moment, he realized that peace was what he had truly been seeking all along. He took the coffee she offered, savoring the warmth of the cup in his hands as he sat down at the small table. "You know," he began, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about last night, about living for myself, not for what others expect." Lily nodded, encouraging him to continue. "It's not going to be easy," David said slowly, his voice low. "I've spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to be the person others wanted me to be. But now, I just don't know how to start. I don't even know where to begin." Lily set down the coffee pot and sat across from him. "It's okay to not have all the answers," she said gently. "The important thing is that you're asking the right questions now. You're already on the path." David sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I wish I could see it that way. I've been so focused on everything outside of myself that I've forgotten what really matters." Lily smiled softly, her gaze steady and kind. "You're not alone in that. We all lose our way sometimes. The trick is to recognize it, and to make the choice to change." David looked at her, seeing her not just as the woman who had helped him, but as someone who had figured something out about life that he was just starting to understand. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said quietly. "I've been chasing success, chasing validation, and I've been ignoring what's right in front of me. I'm here, with you, and for the first time in a long time, I feel calm." Lily's smile deepened. "That's because you're starting to listen to yourself, David. When you stop chasing everything, when you stop trying to prove yourself, you can finally hear what you really need." David sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on her words. For so long, he had been pushing forward, driven by a desire to succeed, to be the best. But now, sitting here in this simple cabin, with Lily's quiet wisdom guiding him, he realized that maybe success wasn't about what he could achieve. Maybe it was about how he could live authentically, peacefully, without the constant pressure to perform. I think I want to live differently," David said, his voice gaining strength. "I want to slow down, to take my time, to do things because they matter to me, not because they'll bring me something in return." Lily looked at him with a quiet pride in her eyes. That's the first step, she said softly. Living for yourself, not for others. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real. David nodded, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. It was a journey, he knew that, and it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he felt ready to take that first step. The path wasn't clear yet, but he knew it was his to walk, at his own pace, in his own way. As the morning unfolded, David felt a sense of clarity and calm that he hadn't felt in years. The world outside still buzzed with noise, with distractions. But here, in this small cabin with Lily, he felt grounded, connected to something real, something simple, and that was enough. It would have to be enough. The world he had left behind, his company, his responsibilities, his high-pressure life, would still be there when he returned. But for now, in this quiet place, David had found a moment of peace, and that was something he never wanted to lose. Days passed by, and with each one, David felt the weight he had carried for so long grow lighter. The mornings in the cabin became a peaceful routine. He woke up with the sun, spent time walking through the woods, and helped Lily with the small tasks around the cabin. The simplicity of his days allowed him to focus on what truly mattered, what he needed, what he wanted, and what he could give back. As the days turned into a week, David felt a deep sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. His mind, which had once been consumed by deadlines and meetings, now felt sharp and clear. He wasn't worried about the next big deal, the next promotion, or how he would manage everything. He was living in the present moment, and for the first time in years, that was enough. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden light spilled into the cabin, David sat on the porch, a cup of tea in his hands. Lily joined him, her usual calm demeanor matching the tranquility of the evening. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. "I never thought I'd be able to feel this at peace," David said, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight to his words, a sense of realization. "I've spent my whole life chasing things that I thought would bring me happiness, but all along, I just needed to slow down and be still." Lily turned to him, her gaze soft. "Sometimes, the answers we're looking for are already inside us, waiting for us to listen. You just had to stop and hear your own heart for once." David looked out over the mountains, the soft breeze brushing against his face. He could hear the rustling of the leaves, the distant call of birds, and the quiet hum of life that seemed so far removed from the rush of the world he had known. He had always been moving, always striving for more, never pausing long enough to appreciate what he already had. But now, in this place, he realized that what he had been chasing wasn't the right thing. It wasn't the success or the power, it was the moments, the people, the simple pleasures of life that made everything meaningful. "I don't want to go back to my old life," David admitted, his voice quieter now, the weight of his words settling in the air between them. "I don't want to go back to being that person, always running after something. I want something different, something real." Lily's expression was warm and understanding, her eyes meeting his with a sense of compassion. "You don't have to go back to that life," she said gently. "You can choose a new one. It's all up to you. No one is forcing you to be who you were before. You can be whoever you want to be now." David felt a surge of gratitude for her, for the way she had opened his eyes to the possibilities of living a life that was true to himself. For so long, he had been living for other people, for the expectations placed on him, for the titles and achievements that defined his worth. But sitting here, with Lily, in this peaceful cabin, he realized that none of that had ever truly mattered. What mattered was how he lived, how he treated the people in his life, and how he chose to spend his time. It was about being true to himself and finding peace in the simple moments, just like this one. As the evening wore on, David and Lily continued to talk. The conversation flowed easily, no longer filled with the tension or pressure of past conversations David had grown used to. There was no need to impress anyone, no need to be anyone but who he was in that moment. For the first time, he wasn't trying to live up to an image or a role, he was simply existing, authentically and fully. "I don't know what the future holds," David said softly, his voice reflecting the calmness he had found within himself. "But I do know this. I want to live a life that makes sense to me. I want to be at peace with who I am." Lily smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. "That's all any of us can do," she said. "We can't control everything, but we can choose how we live, how we respond, and what we value. David nodded, feeling a sense of certainty in her words. The future no longer seemed like something to fear or control, it was simply a series of moments, and he had the power to shape them. For the first time in years, David felt a sense of hope, not because everything was perfect, but because he was finally living in a way that felt real. He wasn't chasing anything anymore, he was embracing everything that life had to offer. As the stars began to fill the night sky, David and Lily sat in silence once more, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. The world around them felt timeless, and for the first time in his life, David felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the days passed, David found himself slipping into a new rhythm, one that felt natural and easy. Life in the cabin had become a quiet comfort, and the world he had left behind felt farther and farther away with each passing day. The pressures, the expectations, the constant noise, all of it seemed so distant now, like a memory that was slowly fading into the background. Every morning, he woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the cabin, the soft light of dawn slowly filling the room, and the warmth of the fire Lily had started the night before. It was simple, and yet, in its simplicity, it was everything David had been yearning for. He spent his days helping Lily with small tasks around the cabin, chopping wood, tending to the garden, and sometimes just walking through the woods, feeling the cool breeze against his skin. It was a life of stillness, a life that allowed him to be present in the moment. He found joy in the small things, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the feeling of the earth beneath his feet, the warmth of the tea Lily made in the afternoons. He had never known that something so simple could feel so fulfilling. But despite the calm and the peace, a part of him knew that he couldn't stay in the cabin forever. As much as he had found peace in this new life, there was still a part of him that was tied to the world he had come from, to the life he had built. One morning, as he sat outside, watching the sun rise over the mountains, Lily joined him with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. She sat down beside him, her gaze following his as she took a sip from her mug. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. David looked at her, his eyes soft with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I'm thinking about everything," he said, his voice low. "I've found peace here, Lily. I really have. But I know I can't just leave everything behind. There's a part of me that's still tied to my life, to the work I've done, the people who depend on me." Lily nodded, her expression calm but understanding. "I know," she said. "You don't have to give everything up. You can carry this peace with you wherever you go. It's not about leaving your life behind. It's about finding a way to live it differently." David's mind raced as he processed her words. He had always thought that to find peace, to find happiness, he had to completely abandon the world he knew. But now, he realized that wasn't true. He didn't have to let go of everything he had built. He just needed to change the way he approached it. "So, what do I do?" David asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "How do I go back to my life and still hold on to this peace?" Lily smiled softly, her eyes filled with quiet wisdom. "You start by remembering what you've learned here," she said gently. "You carry the lessons with you. The stillness, the connection, the ability to be present. You don't have to be consumed by your work, by the demands of your old life. You can choose what matters, and focus on that. The rest will fall into place." David nodded slowly, her words sinking in. For so long he had been running on autopilot, driven by the need to achieve, to perform, to prove himself. But here, in this cabin, he had learned what it meant to be truly present, to embrace the moment, and to find joy in simplicity. He didn't have to abandon his life. He just needed to approach it with a different mindset. "I think I understand now," David said, his voice more confident. "I don't have to let go of everything. I just need to let go of the things that don't serve me. I can still have a meaningful career, but it doesn't have to define me. I can still be present, still connect with the people who matter, and still find peace in the chaos." Lily smiled, her eyes soft with approval. "That's exactly it," she said. "It's about finding balance. You can live in the world and still hold on to the peace you've found here." As the days continued to pass, David's perspective on life slowly shifted. He didn't rush back into his old routines. Instead, he took his time, slowly easing back into his work, but with a new sense of clarity and purpose. He still had responsibilities, still had goals. But now, he didn't let those things consume him. He made time for the simple joys, for the moments that truly mattered. And through it all, he carried the lessons he had learned in the cabin with Lily. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first arrived, and he knew he would never be that person again. The peace he had found was now a part of him, and no matter where life took him, he would always carry it with him. It wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could live a life that was true to himself, one that was peaceful, balanced, and full of meaning. Weeks had passed since David had returned to his life, and although he had brought the peace of the cabin with him, the transition hadn't been without its challenges. The world outside the quiet refuge of the cabin was still loud, still demanding, and still filled with the same pressures that had once consumed him. But now, he approached it all differently. He had learned the art of balance, of allowing himself to live with purpose without letting the weight of expectations drown him. One morning, as he walked through the city streets, the familiar rush of noise and movement hit him like a wave. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, David felt a sense of calm. He moved through the crowd with intention, focused on the present moment, on the people around him, and on the work that lay ahead. He was no longer trying to outrun time or success. He was simply living, fully and authentically. David had kept in touch with Lily over the weeks, their conversations often drifting to the lessons they had shared during his time at the cabin. Her words continued to resonate with him, and he found himself thinking about her wisdom often. One afternoon, he decided to visit her again, knowing that he needed a reminder of what he had learned. He drove through the winding mountain roads, the familiar feeling of the journey giving him a sense of comfort. When he arrived at the cabin, he found Lily sitting on the porch, her eyes turned toward the horizon as if waiting for him. She smiled when she saw him and stood to greet him. "It's good to see you," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "How's everything going?" David returned her smile, feeling the weight of the world slip away just by being in her presence. "It's been a lot," he admitted, "but I'm managing. I've been applying what I learned from here, from you. It's not easy, but it's definitely better than before." Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're doing the hard work, and that's the most important part," she said. "The real change comes from within, and you're already on that path." They spent the afternoon talking about life, about the ways David was learning to stay grounded, and about the moments that brought him peace amidst the chaos. They discussed the balance between work and living authentically, the way the simple things, the quiet moments, the connections with people could bring more joy than anything he had ever chased before. As the evening wore on, David found himself once again reflecting on everything that had brought him here, everything that had led him to this new understanding of life. "I think the hardest part is knowing that the world hasn't changed," David said quietly, his voice soft in the quiet of the cabin. "The noise is still there. The demands are still there. But I've changed. I've learned to let go, to live for myself." Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's the key," she said gently. "You don't control the world around you, but you control how you respond to it. The world will always be loud, but you don't have to let it drown you." David smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her presence in his life, for the guidance she had provided. "I don't think I could have learned this without you," he said sincerely. "I feel like I'm finally living the way I was always meant to." Lily's smile was warm, and she gave him a reassuring nod. "You're doing the work," she said softly. "You've always had this inside you, David. I just helped you see it." As the evening settled into night, the two of them sat quietly on the porch, watching as the stars slowly appeared in the sky. David felt the weight of his past life gently lifting away, leaving only the peaceful stillness of the present moment. He no longer felt the need to rush forward or prove himself to anyone. He was content, knowing that the path he was walking now was his own, a path that was true to who he was and what he valued. The journey ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, David felt ready to face it with an open heart, grounded in the lessons he had learned and the peace he had found. He knew that life would continue to be full of challenges, but he also knew that he had the strength to meet them with calmness and clarity. It wasn't about finding a destination, it was about living fully, authentically, and with purpose, and that was enough. Months passed, and David's life began to unfold in ways he had never imagined. The transition he had made from the corporate world to living a life of purpose, balance, and authenticity had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. His days were now filled with meaning, and he had learned how to live in the present, how to connect deeply with the world around him. He had created a new life, one that wasn't defined by wealth or success, but by peace, connection, and the simple joys of living authentically. He still worked, but it was no longer the center of his universe. He had found a way to balance his career with his newfound peace, and each day, he made sure to leave time for the things that truly mattered. One evening, David sat in his office, the glow of the city lights spilling through the windows. He was on a call, discussing a new project, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't consumed by it. His thoughts were clear, his mind calm. As the conversation came to a close, he hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of reflection. His life had changed. He had changed. And it wasn't because of the success he had achieved or the projects he had worked on, it was because he had learned to live for himself, to live authentically, and to make choices based on what truly brought him joy and fulfillment. He thought about Lily and the lessons she had taught him. He thought about the cabin, the stillness, the peace he had found there. She had given him the greatest gift, the gift of seeing what truly mattered. Without her, he might have continued down a path that was empty, chasing things that never brought him true happiness. David stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the city below. He had everything he needed, and yet there was no urgency, no pressure to be more or to have more. He had peace. And with that peace came a deep sense of contentment. He had learned that life was not about proving himself to others, but about living in a way that felt true to who he was. That was enough. The phone rang again, but this time, David didn't jump to answer it. Instead, he took a deep breath, letting the silence of the moment wash over him. He had everything he needed right here. He didn't need to chase anything anymore. The peace he had found was his to keep, and that was worth more than anything the world could offer. As he picked up the phone, he smiled, ready to take on whatever came next, but with a calmness and clarity that had never been there before. He was no longer running. He was simply living, and in that, he had found everything he needed. The journey had been long, and it had been challenging, but David had finally found what he had been searching for all along, a life of balance, of authenticity, and of peace. He was ready for whatever the future held, but he was no longer afraid. He knew that whatever came his way, he could face it with the same clarity, calmness, and strength that had brought him here. This was his new beginning, one that would carry him forward into a future that was true to himself, full of meaning and full of love.